Hello, everybody, and welcome to the McGuireWoods Private Wealth Services virtual series, our third installment, Update on Washington. Thank you so much for joining us today virtually. Look forward to a future opportunity when we can all be together. I'm here with my colleague, Ryan Bernstein, and we'll give you more background on us, but I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items, if you don't mind. Once you access the program, you'll find several widgets on your screen. Feel free at any point during the presentation to explore them. There's three widgets in particular I'd like to call your attention to. One is the Resources widget, which includes a copy of the presentation. If you'd like, you're welcome to save the presentation on your desktop or print along with the presentation. You'll also find in the Resources widget a link to our McGuireWoods Consulting homepage, the firm's homepage, the Coronavirus Impact and Insights page, and upcoming McGuireWoods programming. The URL widget houses a link to the Private Wealth Services team and practice page, And feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the presentation. Any questions that we aren't able to cover during the 1-hour session, we will follow up with you all after the program. If we'll reach out to you all individually. You will also find a bios widget on your screen as well. You can expand this feature to get the information about each of us and the work that we do for McGuireWoods Consulting. Finally, please note that the full presentation will be recorded. We will be providing a copy of this recording together with the PowerPoint deck after the presentation has ended. We'll distribute those links via email in the next day or so. So with that, a little bit on your presenters. First, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Ryan Bernstein.
Thanks, Mona. Appreciate it. Glad to be here with you all. As you can see, we're doing our best to work through the social distancing, so it might be a little bit awkward, but it's good to be in person with you, Mona, to talk about this. Just a little bit of background about myself. I joined McGuireWoods a little over 2 years ago. I came from Senator John Hoeven's office. Senator Hoeven is the senator from North Dakota, now the senior senator of North Dakota. I actually followed him out to Washington, D.C. from the governor's office, where I was his deputy chief of staff, legal counsel for years, and handled, I guess, when we're in the governor's office, a little bit of everything, but largely, criminal justice, energy, highway patrol, things like that. So came out to the Senate. It was a different world. We were in the minority at that point, was the junior senator from North Dakota. And when I left, we were in the majority and the senior senator. So a lot changed, but been here at McGuireWoods now working on kind of all things that come up, largely focused on the Senate, but as we work together, try to cover both the House, Senate, and the White House. So pleasure to be here, and thanks, Mona, so much.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. My name is Mona Mohib, and I've been at McGuireWoods for more than a decade. And my background is a bit of a hybrid. I both do work at our federal level, particularly in our House and Senate work. But my background is very much in the world of intergovernmental affairs, so state and local government work, and worked at the Clinton White House a few years ago, working in intergovernmental affairs, and at the Department of Labor, working with governors, mayors, and local officials. I have gone back and forth between doing federal work and working with, governors and so forth, and here at McGuireWoods have really tried to integrate that work because, and we can talk about more about this later, but there is definitely connections to what's happening in Washington to what's happening around the country. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I'm pleased to be here, and we're looking forward to this discussion. So thank you in advance. So our agenda for today is, I think we obviously have to start off talking about what's happening vis-a-vis the passing of Justice Ginsburg, which we will. We'll then spend quite a bit of time talking about the presidential election, which is coming in just over 40 days. And then we'll spend some time talking about the Senate and the House of Representatives. This is a really big election cycle. Kind of all hands are on deck. This is the right time to be having this conversation, and we're pleased to be here.
Yeah, I would say, we're around 40-some days out, and all of these things really kind of tie together at this point. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court ties together what's going to happen through the rest of this Congress, and I think, frankly, depending on how it goes, and I think it looks like it's pretty set at this point what happens with the Supreme Court, that really does set kind of the agenda and, frankly, the mood likely for the next Congress. So, when the old saying, and I'll say it again, I'm sure, the old saying of all politics is local, it's not the case anymore, largely. There are some exceptions that we'll talk about through some of the races, but right now this is a national agenda, and a lot of the races will be decided because of that national agenda, and the policies that we see in the next Congress will be driven by this election and, frankly, the attitude coming out of this election. So a lot to work in here, but looking forward to jumping right into it.
Great. I don't think Ryan or I could understate what the impact of the passing of Justice Ginsburg on Friday night has done. We were already in a full sprint to Election Day. People start to really pay attention in earnest after Labor Day. That coupled with the really unfortunate passing of Justice Ginsburg has really turned the city into a spiral. Lots of activity, activist groups, media, elected officials are all now sort of very focused on how this works. I think the key here is, one thing to think about with the president is it allows the president to pivot off the discussion on COVID and to talk about the appointment of his third justice this term. And it's a place where he's incredibly comfortable talking about. It allows him to talk directly to the base. Issues around abortion heretofore haven't been very present. I think this very much allows for it to come to the forefront. How he makes the selection this Saturday, who he chooses, where the issues, these very sort of issues, how they come to pass, I think allow him to speak directly to his base. And I suspect that there are some folks that think that this is a good place for him to be, a little more air cover over the sort of day-to-day discussion on the impact of the more than 200,000 people who've passed away from COVID-19. Before I continue, did you want to address that point, Ryan?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the Supreme Court narrative works out this time. Historically, it's been, frankly, good for the conservatives, for the Republicans to have a Supreme Court nom up. Largely, that gets the Republicans motivated, probably more than the Democrats, on turning out to vote, because really, I think a lot of people see the courts, and especially the Supreme Court, as one of their main things that government needs to have checks and balances. And I think that's evident by what the Senate's been doing, frankly, for the last 6 months to maybe 2 years, you could argue, is confirm federal judges. McConnell says that's been his greatest achievement as majority leader, period. So obviously this means a lot for the Republicans. That may be changing a little bit now. It'll be interesting to see, because this is such a different spot than historically has been up, where it's truly a swing from possibly from a more liberal justice to a very conservative justice is the overall thought. And what we saw with Kavanaugh, the buildup, frankly, of the anger, the battle over a Supreme Court justice, I think is only going to continue to pick up. And the question is now that the Democratic base has really been focused on this for the last 2 years, saying we need to do everything we can to stop Kavanaugh. What in the world, what can they do, and we'll talk about it, to stop the next nomination? And if they can't, what do they do after that? So I think the question is now, does the nominee get through? I think it's looking much more likely that we'll say she, because the president said he's going to nominate a woman. She will get through. You just had Senator Collins from Maine and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska come on and say that they're not going to support moving forward during the election year. But basically all the other Republicans are getting in line to support that. So the Republicans, as we'll talk, have 53 senators, which means if they only lose 2, they still have enough to move this through, because now, and we'll talk about it again a little bit more, it only takes a majority of the senators to confirm a nominee. That has changed over the last few years. Senator Reid started and removed that filibuster requirement of 60 votes a few years ago when he was majority leader. McConnell lowered that, changed the threshold for the Supreme Court then, last go-around, and so now that's where we're at this point. So I think really the only question here at this point is, do the Republicans get the Supreme Court nominee placed and voted on before the election, or just after the election, lame duck? There's pros and cons to that. Definitely getting the justice in beforehand. As a lot of conservatives are saying, look, you need it because you need a full court in case this is Bush v. Gore all over again. Let's hope it doesn't get protracted like that. But on the flip side, if you put a nominee and confirm them, does that create some complacency on the Republican side that you already got your Supreme Court nom, and you kind of suppress some of the vote turnout on the Republican side and only increase the anger and the turnout for the Democrats on the November election? So a lot of that's in flux. And again, depending how this goes, you can really see that may shape how Senate approaches legislation and their own judicial nominees, especially, of course, if Biden takes over the White House and the Democrats take over the Senate. So this is, it's 2020, I guess. This is how it's been going. So it couldn't get any wilder, and it just got wilder.
Sure, and that's great, Ryan. And then sort of just 2 additional points. One, I think Leader McConnell does take great pride that they were able to prevent Merrick Garland in 2016 from going through the judicial process. So, and that was very much seen as a motivating factor to the base that they were able to do that. Second, obviously the president is looking at his election, would really like to see this as a feather in his cap before the election, again, as you said, to sort of galvanize. Isn't there a particular issue, and maybe it doesn't come down to one vote? Obviously, the leader isn't going to move this until he has the votes to get through. But Arizona is a special election, is that correct, as an example? So if, and we're going to talk about the Senate in depth shortly, but if McSally, a Republican, loses her seat, I think there's a process by which Mark Kelly, Democrat, could be sworn in by the end of November. So I think things like that are also part of the landscape as people think about what the next steps are.
Yeah, it's about how close do they want to play this? Do they want to have it in hand and move on? In theory, you could still have 50-50. You still have the votes, but it frankly does, I think, look kind of bad to have the executive branch come in, cast the deciding vote in the Senate, although Trump might like that look to have Pence in there and voting for the nominee. So it's yet to be seen. I think they do have the votes in the Senate to get it done. Just less than 40 days is fast to go through the confirmation process for sure. So we'll see.
Well, I saw sort of a humorous tweet this morning that said Merrick Garland is in the driveway of McConnell saying, "I hear you're going to move forward on a Supreme Court nomination. I'm ready." So, lots of intrigue around this, but I think, as Ryan said, there seems to be a path forward, and we'll see. And as of last night, the President announced that he would make his selection on Saturday night. It appears to be down to 2, but again, unclear. There may be other pieces that we don't all know publicly. So,
yeah.
But yeah, no. I do hope that people take the chance to really sort of think about Justice Ginsburg, because it was sort of within 90 minutes that we'd already gone to the horse race, and she has an incredible legacy, and I think sort of in time will allow for that. Obviously, she's her services here in D.C. have started today for the next 3 days. So, but yeah, can't underestimate how a Supreme Court fight 40 plus days before the election impacts all the dynamics.
Well, I mean, and just another little anecdote, it's just, Senator Hovind and I were one of the few Republicans to actually meet with Merrick Garland going through his confirmation process. Most didn't even want to have that first meeting, but I can tell you firsthand how heated it got from the conservative base that we even just met with him. And that was 200 some days out or something that we met with him. So it really does galvanize the Republican base historically on this, and McConnell counts his votes very well, so I think we know where the votes are at this point. And he knew that, frankly, I think, when he put out the statement.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, thank you, Ryan. Should we
Yep. Move on?
So, moving right in, nice segue to the 2020 presidential election. The polls are changing, quickly. So, right now, Joe Biden sort of has a national lead of 7 to 8 percentage points. And I think those of us who came out on the bad side of 2016 are a little gun shy about polling. And, I think there is a real fear that, sort of a comfort level with polling will end up sort of turning things upside down. In 2016, there was a lot of undercounting in the polling because there were people who were voting for Trump but didn't want to talk about it publicly. And there may be a fear, again, that there still could continue to be undercounting. So, all of these polls are what they are. We watch them because they're part of the horse race, but we also recognize that things could change. Even if I remember Election Day in 2004, Senator Kerry was doing quite well, and some of the polling was a little bit off. But it is sort of one of the guideposts that we use. So 7 to 8 points up, but if, and Ryan will talk a little bit about this, when we sort of look at the map. In some states, the lead isn't super significant, so those states could shift back and forth. One piece I think it's important to remember is sort of the quintessential right track, wrong track. It's something that pollsters talk about all the time. Right now, in recent polling, Americans, 65% of people think we're on the wrong track, 39% of people think we're on the right track. That's a gap, I think, that's a little hard to close. And I think this election very specifically, one, will be a referendum on the president, and two, in 2016, a lot of his mantra was, I am the one who can fix it. He now has a 4-year record where that will be sort of on the docket. So he now has a record to run on. I don't want to speak for my colleague Ryan, but I do think Republicans will continue to try to knock Biden based on how he does at the debates. I think this is very much a game of expectation setting. I do think there's a little bit of a hazard in saying that Biden will do terrible and he can't put two words together, because I think if he does a good job, that will sort of beat expectations. We've seen this with other presidential candidates in the past. But there'll be a lot of rhetoric. He's going to, raise your taxes $4 billion. The liberals are going to take over. Anyone who knows Senator Biden at all is actually facing an internal fight with members of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party who already feel like he's too conciliatory to the Republicans. And I think that is truly based on his experience in the Senate of working across party lines, having real relationships across the line. So I think we'll talk about this more, but there clearly, if he takes over the White House, will be a lot of push-pull between the progressive, the moderate Democrats, and then also the ability to work across the aisle. So global thoughts on the race?
Yeah, to your point, Mona, I think, frankly, the Republicans are doing a terrible job setting up these debates. If he stands up and makes it through, I think, the Republicans have set the bar so low for the vice president that it'll look like a win for him. So it's an absolute mistake, I think, what the Republicans are doing with these debates. Although it is, frankly, again, must-watch TV. I think that debate coming up on the 29th is going to be very important.
Can I interrupt, though, just for 1 second?
Yeah.
Doesn't that also play the other way with the vice presidential debate? And people, I think, keep saying Kamala Harris is going to wipe the floor with Mike Pence, and I think the vice president may benefit a little bit on the opposite side. If no one expects him to be able to sort of hold his own, and it's sort of equal, it could look like a win for Pence. So the game of expectation setting is very interesting.
It is, and you get two candidates that are absolutely the opposite. If you look on the ticket, I think, on the presidential side, we'll see how it's played out, but, Trump is much more the aggressor and will be, kind of more, I think, aggressive against Biden. We'll see if Biden kind of plays it off as very stately, senator, vice president, all that. And then flip side, we'll see how it goes. But on the vice president, Mike Pence has that very calm demeanor that could be the opposite, where Senator Harris sometimes could be a little bit more of a prosecutor type of hat. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think that largely historically, and I think it's still true, this race is going to be decided on the top of the ticket.
Sure.
And so I think that debate between the president and the vice president is going to be immensely it's going to be a must-watch TV, as I said. It's just the thing that I think the Republicans are working on doing now, and Mona's right about the president running on his record, but the president's complained a lot about the circumstances that he's now given, if you will, from his perspective on COVID and stuff like that, and that's been a very tough thing to run on. But he's doing his best now to shift the discussion to more of the protest, the unrest, and not running on his record, running on what it would look like if he's not in there, and he's pointing to Democratic mayors in his eyes that are not handling the protests very well. So between that and the Supreme Court, they're hoping to very much change the narrative moving forward. Yet to be seen how that's really panning out. Some of it's been moving. There's, toward the president's narrative, I would say, but he hasn't gotten to where he needs to be, largely because it's hard to break through on the media on a lot of the other stuff. Now that's all going to be consumed by the Supreme Court and what the Republicans in the Senate are going to do on that. So it's definitely, when you think you know what the narrative is for the rest of the only 40-some days left, it changes almost daily.
Sure. Yeah, every day is like 12 media cycles. So another piece on, before we look at the map, on sort of expectation setting, the president has spent quite a bit of time of saying, litigating, not in a legal term, but discussing ballots, absentee ballots, illegal ballots. By the way, I heard something today I hadn't learned, as someone who sort of lived through hanging chads, is naked ballots. I guess that is potentially an issue in Pennsylvania, where if people don't put the inside envelope in, potentially their vote will be eliminated. How do you think that plays? So if the president appears to be setting an expectation that they should be able to declare a winner on election night, we recognize that there is a large volume of people who are filling out paper ballots and bringing them in or sending them in. And in some states, you can't actually start counting them until Election Day. It's an interesting sort of gamesmanship that the president's playing, where I think if he's ahead in states where he ultimately doesn't win, I think he'd like to be able to call the election. One, what are your thoughts on that? And two, if I were watching the markets, how do you think this plays?
Yeah, well, two good questions. I think there's, looking at the polling, we'll look at it, but it could be pretty easily, it's either going to be probably one or two things. Either Biden's going to win, and we know that night, and it might not even be close. Or if Trump is close, we won't know for a while. I think, it's either going to be clear-cut, it was a landslide for Biden, frankly, I think, or it'll be close enough to where we're in this stage of like, let's see what the ballots look like, come in. There's been a lot made about the post office ballots, all that kind of stuff. And we may even go back to seeing some discussions about a 133-year-old act that requires electors to be seated 41 days after the election so that we can move on. So we have all those things, which, again, the Supreme Court kind of plays into. That's where the conservatives want to put justice on there, so we have 5-4 so we don't get in a constitutional crisis. We'll see. I think it's a little bit, I'll be honest, I think it's a little bit of Democrats seeding a little bit of discord and saying, he's not going to leave, these ballots are not going to be counted. There's going to be, this is COVID, it's difficult, there's going to be some stumbles here and there, but I have confidence that the Republic will hold together and that we'll get through it. I think it's a lot of making sure people turn out on the Republican side now. I think a lot of the conversation is making sure the Republicans turn out to vote because they're worried about the mail-in ballots and stuff like that. So I think it's a way, and I don't know if it's very effective. I wouldn't probably go down that road myself, but a way for the president to try to get his people to turn out worried about that. But what to your point, Mona, what do you see kind of as states that are, you think, and maybe we'll get into this, like, where do you think this could really play out, and what states maybe we'll look at here?
Yeah, well, why don't we take a look at that?
What states could this actually play out in?
Well, sure. So on our next slide, and as I said, there are various maps we could have chosen. This is one and this is sort of set of states and so forth. Listen, I think the way it looks like is there are red states and then there are blue states, and I think what this race really comes down to is probably, give or take, there's probably a dozen states that this really truly comes down to, right? So those are the battleground states. I think you include there any of these states that are toss-ups that are in sort of a brown color on our map, but I think you have to include in the toss-up states that are leaning R or leaning D, which just, I think, means that there's still potential, a little bit room for movement. Listen, Hillary only won Minnesota in that sort of great sort of steel curtain of the Midwest. And traditionally, Democrats who've won have been able to keep Michigan, the sort of trifecta of Michigan, Wisconsin, and then including Pennsylvania. Florida is always Florida. I think that Hillary gave back a bunch of states, which of course was part of the problem. So look, I think, for Biden to win, he's got to win. I mean, he has to bring back, he has to win back the states that other Democrats have won, right? So he has to win Pennsylvania, which is virtually a home state for him. He's got to win Wisconsin, which is really close right now, Michigan, and hold on to Minnesota. The president is clearly making a play for Minnesota as one of the states he cares about. I think you also should kind of look at sort of the Sun Belt states. Vice President Biden is actually sort of overperforming in those states. And so that could be a real pickup. If you look at this and think, well, Trump will be able to hold on part of that Midwest. He's not going to cede all of it. He'll be able to hold on. Then it really is up to states like, got to win Nevada, got to win New Mexico. And those are states that, and you have some of the numbers in front of you, those are states that Biden is doing well, really well in. But look, I think if I remember correctly, in 2016, Trump got I think he has to win all the states he won, and then I think he has to win more. One larger global issue, and I know we're talking specifically about states, is just as coming from the Democratic side of the aisle, there is sort of a general fear, by the way, that this race can't be close. If this race is close at all, it feeds into the, all of the conspiracy theories that people are putting forward. I think you have to, there is among sort of grassroots Democrats, there's certainly a feeling that you have to win and you have to win big, so it feels like a mandate. And so I think there's always a balance. You have to win sort of your base states. Some might say in 2016 that we were sort of potentially reaching for the stars in a few states that we spent a lot of time in, like Georgia. We were spending time in Texas. And it's going to be that balance, I think, for the Biden team to, first of all, they have to bring back states that Democrats have typically won and hold those. They have to go to those kind of swing states. And, look, always good to put people on defense. But I think the lesson of 2016 that we've learned is, but you got to lock in the home states.
You got to at least visit some of those states.
Well, there's a lot going on.
But yeah, to your point, I mean, if you look at the map that we have up right now, and it's colored basically as to the polling of that state. So the blue states, the light blue states, Biden is leading in those states. And if you take it as is, even if you take off all those states in the brown, which are truly toss-ups, this map itself gives Biden 278 electoral votes, Trump 187. So if you just have this the way it is, Biden is president. So here now, Trump needs to start going back and pulling out some of these states. So even this map, even if Trump wins Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Arizona, it's still not enough. So he really does need to dig back into those states that there's some area. He needs to pull 8 off the board, so even getting Nevada is not enough. You need to pull out of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, as Mona was pointing out. And Trump won Michigan by 0.3% last time. I mean, it was extremely close. So it's not like he has a lot of leeway in that state at all. And right now in Michigan, the latest polls show Biden up by like 6.5, Wisconsin 7, Minnesota 10. So it's a real challenge to the president, and I think he understands that this is his area, and states like, Iowa, he's got to hold that kind of stuff. You can see by what they're doing right now, it's a farm program. You don't see farmers become that important these days, it seems like, in legislation, until a presidential election where they need to pull in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, keep Iowa, because the government almost shut down over the president wanting $30 billion to be able to go out to his food aid program. The House refused to put it in, thinking it was a slush fund for the president to hand out to farmers. And so the president threatened that he was not going to sign the continuing resolution here a couple of days ago. Enough Democrats even revolted against it, because you got Colin Peterson, who's the chairman of the Agriculture Committee in the House, who's a Democrat, who's from Minnesota, that needed it. So they went back, they put it back in. So you can see how much those states are playing in the presidential election right now on the government funding at this point. So they're really weighing in on that. Those are your big plays. But I guess to Mona, maybe if I may ask, when you say you need a mandate, what does a mandate look like? Put you on the spot. Like, is 278, 300? Is
I want
what the president
80%. No, I know. I think if it's close, it just, I mean, for the group, I was the political director for Michigan in 2000, and having lived through the 2000 presidential race, I sort of we won Michigan, we elected Debbie Stabenow to the Senate, we had a really, really great day. I looked at my friends in Florida, didn't work out so great. I just don't want it to be close. That's all. I'm not quite sure. It's not very articulate sort of specificity, but it just would feel better if it wasn't close, because I just don't want to play into sort of the conspiracy stuff. If and when President Biden is elected, he's got to lead, and I just don't want to see the first 6 months sort of, relitigating all this, which maybe is inevitable, but I hope not.
Well, I told you I had a small anecdote of me doing an RV trip through Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, heading to my home state of North Dakota, and it was 100-to-1 Trump signs to Biden. So, I mean, they're passionate. People are painting their barns, painting their trucks, putting out by the roads. Saw people standing out there honk for Trump. Granted, it was rural areas, but the enthusiasm hasn't dropped off to the core Trump supporters. It's whether or not he can continue to maintain and at least cut into a little of the Biden supporters in the college-educated suburbans, things like that. So I don't know, Mona, if you think that there are...
Well, Ryan didn't go to Detroit. So
I did not go to Detroit. Which
didn't go to
any
Democratic strongholds. So I think maybe what makes sense, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about this, but we still have quite a bit to get through, so we may just sort of pick up the pace just a little bit, although I could talk to you all day, obviously. But listen, it's going to be close. I think no Democrat is taking a sort of 7 to 8 point national lead. I think they're trying to run from behind. I think all the states where they are up, and it's a great place to be. They also recognize that these races are going to tighten. We're going to, at some very soon after, we're going to start talking about the Senate races, and these are all very connected. So I think that, a lot of Republicans will need for the president to have pretty strong coattails, and so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But look, I think, from my perspective, Vice President Biden has a really, really strong chance to be the president.
Should we look at some of his policies that he may have?
Sure.
Then,
We'll take for sure.
Probably likely where it's going to go.
Sure. Listen, I think one of the number one things that the vice president has been talking about has been COVID-19, and he's been sort of a shadow COVID government. I think he's been writing about this since, the people who work around him have vast experience working on these issues, H1N1, Ebola, and so forth. And so I think when they started to see things happening, offices coming down that used to be proactive looking at it, some of the steps I think Vice President Biden has really tried to sort of forecast what he might do if he were the president. So I think COVID will be, number one, things that he and his team will be working on. They're clearly already thinking about it, just kind of a new way of approaching how we do this so that we can try to get a handle of it. A couple of things, we won't go into great detail, but, he's been talking about $2 trillion in green energy for 4 years. This involves electric vehicles, infrastructure, broadband, grids, et cetera. So that'll be, which I think he would also say is very much a jobs bill, too. So a little bit on that. I'm going to spend a lot of time working on issues around seniors and children, universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, and also increased Medicaid for home and community-based services, et cetera. So a lot in the sort of human services space. Reshoring. There's ads all the time about, bringing jobs back to America, $400 billion direct U.S. purchases, a lot of focus on research and development. This is where it all connects, the clean energy, electric vehicles, 5G technology. So these are a couple of the issues. Also, there's some, other issues that I think particularly the base will like, discussions of the minimum wage, $15 an hour, legislation, more partnerships with our labor unions. This, I think, is a significant piece. I think everyone on this call has been tracking what the Biden plan is on taxes. So no new taxes for individuals making $400,000 or less, would raise the top rate to 39.6% and would impose the payroll tax above $400,000. And so we've got a number of those here, pieces to talk about. 15% minimum tax on corporations with at least $100 million. Another significant piece, I think that'll be important to him, is a lot of discussion on education. Have to think, his potential vice presidential candidate, Elizabeth Warren, has been a little bit in his ear talking about some of these issues. But also Jill Biden. I mean, you can't underestimate his wife, who's
Harris, the VP candidate, yeah.
Yeah, no, but I meant, I'm sorry, I should have been clearer. He's continuing to talk to I'm sorry, I should be clear. Obviously, Harris is the educator, but a number of folks that ran for president this year. I think the vice president has taken great time to really meet with them and talk to them and talk about issues. One of the candidates for president, Elizabeth Warren, spent a lot of time talking about education issues. So I think some of this maybe influences my point. That, making all public universities free for families with incomes under $125,000, and also talking quite a bit about loan forgiveness, which obviously would be a bit of an expensive program. So there are all sorts of policy groups, working groups. They have brought everybody back to work on all sorts of issues. I know just in their foreign policy think group, I think there's like 1,000 people. Don't quote me on that, but I think there's lots of people. There's a lot of Democrats who, after being out of office for 4 years, really see the Biden administration, in their eyes, as a way of leveling the ship a little bit. I've heard the quote, stopping the bleeding. It's all perspective, obviously, but a real opportunity. And what's going to happen is, Democrats feel like when they get in, should Biden win in November, they're going to have to really pull up the rugs and not only see what we know that has happened over the last 4 years, but perhaps things to sort of cut the federal government that they may not be aware of. So a lot of people interested, a lot of people active. Really quickly, the next 2 steps will be a lot of folks joining Biden's transition team, which is very standard fare. Every opponent sets up a transition team, and lots of people getting involved with the campaign because they want to, and maybe in hopes of joining a Biden administration.
Well, to your point, you said, frankly, I think you said at one point, a lot of expensive programs. I would say that's very true. So a lot of at least things on the table at this point. I think, looking forward, just kind of trying to tie this together. I know we're getting a little tight on time, but, look, we got a continuing resolution to fund government through likely December 11th. Question at that point will be, how far do we do a government funding bill at that point, or do we kick it into the next term for the president, saying let's say it's President Biden at that point. Democrats may want to do that to line up his priorities. I think the big question at that point is, for sure, we will do a COVID bill under President Biden. How much gets wrapped into that? I think there will be a big push to it won't be just COVID. I think you could look at some other priorities kind of getting wrapped in there, child care, elder care, even some kind of infrastructure-backed jobs. I mean, that might not just be testing for COVID. That could be a massive bill. And look what the House proposed this last go-around with $3 to $4 trillion of spending. Expect that kind of bill, I think, from my perspective, to see the light of day if President Biden is the president next year. So I think that COVID bill, that first bill, is going to be massive and will set the priority, I think, for the next Congress. I know we got at least one question coming in here, and I want to, before we move off the presidential stuff, asked about the Maine and Nebraska coloring. We should have brought that up. They're stripes because, unlike all other states, it's not a winner-take-all electoral college in those states. So Maine and Nebraska could actually each cast votes for Biden and Trump. So that's where that came in. So.
Great. Okay. And
covered that.
Sure.
Maybe I'll just touch base
a
little bit on. I almost put Trump's full second term agenda up here. He has a very bare bones, to be honest with you, second term policy platform, and pretty general. Jobs, eradicating COVID, that's directly from his planks, and reliance on China, innovation and healthcare. And I had to quote his innovation platform of build the world's greatest infrastructure system. So I think Mona, Democrats are going to have a hard time disagreeing with that, right? Build the world's greatest infrastructure.
I always thought that was the place he should have started.
So I think, depending on where we are after the election, I think you're going to see a lot of the same kind of policies from President Trump, probably likely going after health care. Try to do as much as they can on taxes. We can talk a little bit more about that at some point, but trying to make as much taxes permanent as possible as they continue to creep towards the 2025 expiration of the Jobs Act, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and then probably continue to work on trade deals. China's not done. I really don't think it is. They're going to keep going after China, and then we'll try to work on some other bilateral agreements, and the EU and others, of course. So a lot for Trump to look at. Frankly, very little on specifics at this point.
Sure. Probably we should hit the Senate. So we'll try to go quickly through the Senate and the House. Obviously, a lot going on. We could certainly use more than an hour, but pleased to be here. Listen, the Senate map favors the Democrats. There's only 12 seats that they need to hold. They look very good in 10 of those 12 seats. The two seats that I think Democrats are watching is the Michigan seat, Senator Peters, Democrat. It's still leaning Democrat, but it's a race that everyone in the party is watching. The race that I think we're very hopeful, but is probably our biggest challenge, honestly, is the Alabama Senate race with Doug Jones. He's a terrific senator, wonderful person, incredible history. But the president is up by like 28 points in Alabama, so it just makes it hard. Alabama isn't a state like maybe Montana, where it's sort of renowned for ticket splitters. So I think we feel really good about the map. How does your map look?
Maybe a little better than yours. I would say, as Mona points out, the Democrats need to take 3 to 4 seats, depending on who wins the presidential election. The Republicans have finally the right candidates up. The Republicans always tend to mess up the primary and get the wrong candidate in. We have good candidates this time, both incumbents and those that are now challenging. I think that Doug Jones, Senator Jones from Georgia,
Alabama.
The world came together for him last time to win.
Oh, in Alabama.
In Alabama.
Yeah.
Sorry, I said Georgia.
That's fine.
Alabama. That won't happen again. So I think, look, the Republicans will pick that up. We'll say 54 Republicans, if you will, and then we got to lose 4 states. But, the way the map is shaping up and how the presidential election could go, that sure could happen. So if I give Mona probably Arizona, which I probably will with Sally, Senator McSally, I think Georgia, the Republicans pick that up. So then we're at a wash. My next states, frankly, we're in real trouble in Colorado and probably Maine. I think Maine, the Supreme Court has hit Senator Collins harder than anybody else. She took a lot of heat from the last Supreme Court nominee. Money has been flowing into that state. Gideon, who's her challenger, has raised over $23 million. There's another 28, 30 plus million dollars that's come in on independent expenditures in that small state, which is amazing, largely driven by the conversation on the Supreme Court. I think this only hurts her. You saw her come out against moving forward on the vote. So I think, between Arizona, Maine, Colorado, we're in trouble. Mona, where else do you think you guys could pick up?
I mean, the other states I'm watching are North Carolina. I'm watching Montana. I think that's kind of our sleeper race. And I'm watching Iowa. So, by the way, yesterday they moved Maine to a lean Democrat. So Collins is, as you said, sort of alluded to, sort of in a kind of a real challenge there. I like North Carolina. Tillis has, had been sort of struggling to navigate the base versus sort of, moderate Republicans. I think also the thing to think about in North Carolina is they have a full slate of races up. They have the governor, very popular Democratic governor. They have a Democratic AG. The whole ticket is up. I think that can only be good for Mr. Cunningham in the Senate race. I feel really good about that. And I feel really good about Montana. I think people sort of have this idea that, well, it's Montana, sort of generalizations that, I'm sure Daines will get reelected. But remember, I mean, this is a place where we got our candidate, as Ryan sort of alluded to earlier with the Republican side. As you may remember, Governor Bullock ran for president. When he got out of the race, there was a lot of pressure from national Democrats.
I'm glad you remembered. You might be the only one. I'm joking with that he ran. He tried.
I mean, it was. If you remember, there was like 100 people who ran, but he did run. And he ran on his record of being Attorney General, two-term, very popular governor of the state. And people forget that Democrats have a real history in Montana. Up until Mr. Daines, we'd enjoyed 2 Democratic senators from Montana, and it is a state renowned for sort of populism and ticket splitters. And when Hillary lost by, I think, 20 points in Montana, Biden's only down by like 8 or 9, if I remember correctly. So the margins are a lot slimmer. He's got the governor has a great record, and I could see a lot of ticket splitters who going for a guy that they know who's been in leadership. So that's one of my races to watch.
I think Montana is going to be pretty close. The trouble is, I think there is a downside of being governor during COVID because you own it more than another candidate would if you weren't in office. So there's a little bit of that going on in Montana. Daines is a good candidate. It is definitely a ticket-splitting state, but Daines is running a good candidacy. I would say that I would agree with you. Iowa, I think, is to me like not getting enough attention. Senator Ernst, she's been running a tough campaign. She usually kind of lags even sometimes on the Republican overall candidacies in Iowa, so she doesn't outperform like Trump in a lot of the polling, which is concerning. So if Trump is having trouble in Iowa, the trade wars that have happened have not helped her at all in Iowa. Supreme Court hasn't helped her. We've got a lot of things going against Senator Ernst in Iowa, so I'm quite concerned about that seat.
Definitely a race to watch. But whatever happens, it's going to be close. So I think it's still important for people who do work with the Senate to understand that it doesn't make sense to sort of put all your eggs in one party's basket. It's going to be very close, and it's going to require any legislation that gets through is going to require votes from both sides of the aisle. I think if Biden is the president, based on his experience in the Senate, he's well placed to try to maybe to the chagrin of some of the more progressive members of the party, but I think he's well positioned to find opportunities to partner with moderates on both sides.
Yeah, that's right.
Great.
We have the next couple of slides here. It's just kind of the overview of where the lean R, lean D are. So we kind of covered that.
Yeah, we've covered that. That's fine. And we don't need to, because we probably want to get to the House before we get to questions. Listen, if the Democrats take over the Senate, of course, it does matter sort of who the president and who doesn't. But there's not going to be a 6th or 7th vote on killing the ACA. I think we can be assured of that. I think there's going to be discussions around, election reform, ethics. We finally have a real conversation about immigration. But for sure, there's going to be a climate change discussion. I think this is a big priority for people in the party. It will be interesting. I'll defer to Ryan on this. A lot of folks in the progressive wing of the party really feel it's critical to remove the legislative filibuster, which is a very political conversation. We won't spend too much time on it, but it is if we take the Senate, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Mr. Schumer to move forward on a piece of legislation like that.
Yeah, and kind of tying into the House conversation, I think it really does hinge on the filibuster, what happens next Congress. I think the filibuster, from my perspective, is probably likely gone, especially after the Supreme Court battle here. From my perspective, I think it's unfortunate that could be gone. I know the Republicans received a lot of pressure to get rid of the filibuster. Trump wanted to get rid of the filibuster when he came in. Republicans didn't do it. But I think as we look to the House, look at what the House passed this Congress to see, I think, what the House and Senate will pass next Congress without a filibuster. And that goes straight to taxation, health care. I think all those things will speed up greatly when the filibuster is gone. So I think, who controls the House, who barely controls the Senate, if it's the Democrats in the White House, really means that it's a House agenda that passes through the Senate. So I guess with that to the House. We'll flip through. We have some slides on the filibuster, but we've talked a lot about that. And,
sure.
And maybe
the House. So is, the break 435 seats in the House, of course. You need 218 for the majority. The breakdown right now is 237 for the Democrats, 198 for the Republicans. What that means is for Republicans to take over the House, they need to hold all of their 198 seats plus get 20 more. I think the House stays in Democratic hands. There's probably, honestly, of the 435, probably like 60 races maybe total that are either leaning D or leaning R. Democrats have a program, red to blue, which is where they are really credible candidates in districts where we have a Republican member. And so I feel good that the Democrats will retain. They've got like 400 bills that they've lobbed over to the Senate. I think they're looking for partners in the Senate, so they're obviously watching the states for the Senate races. But listen, I think one sort of fundamental thing that I think we've seen over the last couple of days is leadership is hard, and coming up to the election, recognizing that the whole sort of fate of the House comes down to a handful of seats. There's a sort of a line that the Speaker Pelosi is walking where, a lot of pressure, I think, from progressive wing of her party, but also very much a lot of pressure from the moderate Democrats who want a COVID deal, who want to make deals, who want to demonstrate leadership because they're in districts that either are Trump positive or leaning Trump. And so like Speaker Boehner before him with, Republicans and the variety, whether it's moderates or Tea Party, a lot of challenges that she faces going forward. So it comes down to a handful of races. I think it stays in Democratic hands.
I think, it'll stay in Democratic hands. So I think, and like I say, I think that'll drive the agenda next go around. So we have your PDFs will be available for everybody.
PDFs
so we'll have this available. So we'll kind of move through these races.
I just 1 minute. We've got a little bit of background on this. Listen, another big piece that's really important for the House is redistricting comes up in 2021, where they redraw the lines. It's different in each state how the lines are drawn, who has the power of the pen, and so forth. But there's, it's supposed to be kind of reflective of, sort of reflectives of who are in those districts now, how they draw the lines, are the maps fair, but there's always a potential that people can pick up seats. So I know the Democrats have spent, I don't know, I can only speak from that side, probably the last 5 or 6 years getting ready for redistricting to put themselves in the best position. There are certain states where have traditionally had challenges with this, North Carolina and Texas, but there's also opportunities, I think. And so I think even if the maps are drawn fairly, there's a real opportunity for Democrats to pick up seats. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on that.
I would say the maps could be said they're drawn fairly now too. But it will be a big deal. I mean, you saw HR 1 from the House was basically on voting rights and all that. I mean, that's going to be a top priority of the Democrats, I think, moving forward. They held that out. HR 1 was voting rights and rights to the people. HR 2 was their infrastructure package. So I think you can kind of see where some of the priorities are for the Democrats moving forward based on those 2 bills that they passed out of the House.
So if we ever have cocktail parties again and you're allowed to be with people more than 6 feet apart, you can drop the term redistricting. It'll definitely show that you're in the know of Washington speak. So, we've had a lot to cover, and so what we want to do now is try to get to some of the questions, and then if for some reason we aren't able to get to the questions, we will be sure to get back with you individually. So, Ryan, are there any questions?
Well, yeah, I know we only got a couple of minutes left. Looking at some of the questions, one of them I know everybody's very interested in is the tax plans moving forward. Trying to piece some of these questions together. It's an extended discussion, but I would say from my perspective, I think it's on the table. For sure, SALT is on the table if the Democrats take over the House, the Senate, and the White House. And look at, and I think, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, a lot of those taxes will come back onto the table. I know, and this is my skepticism, I know that the White House under a Biden administration is saying no certain taxes here, we're not going to touch the estate taxes. I would be surprised if they don't get real pressure to readdress those things from the House and the Senate, especially if it's Democrats. So even if a Biden platform at this point says they're not going to touch estate taxes, et cetera, I would think that's on the table as they go back and look at the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, including doing more on corporate tax, step-ups, eliminating 1031s. Those are all going to be on the table, I think, especially if you're looking on the corporation side of things. I think that's where their main objective is going to look at for taxes. So, Mona, let's see, what else do we have
here? The Lincoln Project.
The Lincoln Project.
It's a topic of conversation for Ryan and I. Look, I'm in the can. I really like the work that they're doing. I think they're sort of like, to me as a Democrat, they're running the ads that I always dreamed we would run, but we don't. I do think and I do know that a number of Republicans that are comfortable with the presidential ads are not comfortable with them going after the Senate, the senators, and that, sort of like, what's your target? I think people who are overall supportive of the Lincoln Project would say for 4 years, a number of these folks who are up have either been complicit, that's a loaded term, I understand, but I think they feel like they could have done more to step up, and they didn't, which is why I think the Senate folks are on the table. But I think there's clearly the Lincoln Project has sort of, hit a nerve, and I think they're making an impact. But I'm someone in the Beltway, so maybe I'm not maybe nobody outside here knows what the Lincoln Project is.
So the question was, what do we think about the Lincoln Project? My sense is, it does get under the president's nerves, I think, a little bit under his skin. But, I think he does a pretty effective job, and I think his base says, well, those are just never Trumpers. He's done a good job framing that early on, that if you don't agree with him, you're a never Trumper. So I would say it's probably not as effective outside of the Beltway, outside of the political circles. And it's a lot of money for, going after, quote, never Trumpers. So I I don't see it quite as effective maybe as Mona does.
Well, I follow him on Twitter, so.
Especially in his core constituency.
Yeah, no, but interesting. Like, I think it is getting under his nerves, and the idea that they had to run ads for President Trump in the Washington D.C. area, I think speaks to things like that, where there's no reason for the president to run ads in the D.C. area, except for, I think, people on his team want to show him that there are ads running here where he sees them. So
yeah, he does watch the TV.
He does watch a little bit of television, yes, indeed. Did we have any other questions, or have we done well?
Any chance the Senate will not hold hearings on the new justice to avoid Democrat forking? Yeah, I think that they will hold hearings. One of the reasons from a Republican perspective is, honestly, I think it'll be incredibly divisive, but I think from what we saw in Kavanaugh's confirmation, I think the Democrats overplayed their hand on the Kavanaugh deal, which fired up the conservative base more. So I think McConnell's plan is to give the Democrats another chance to go too far out on a woman nominee to the Supreme Court. So I think McConnell will hold the hearings. They'll be quick. A small procedural thing in D.C., but the Democrats invoked a 2-hour rule where we can't have any hearings until like 2 hours until we get in, so we can't have any hearings in the morning, and all Senate business is already starting to shut down because of that. But I think McConnell will definitely try to have a hearing because I think, at least last go around, it worked out okay for the Republicans in the end. And frankly, Lindsey Graham became a rock star on the conservative basis because of his handling Kavanaugh. He'll continue to push for that as chair of Judiciary. That said, lots of people giving to Jamie Harrison in that race because a lot of annoyed Democrats at Lindsey Graham. But should I wrap up, I think? Okay. So, I mean, we're over time, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Just a reminder, this presentation was recorded, and you have access now, and in a couple of days, we'll be sending the presentation out. So thank you so much for all participating and taking the time out of your day to be with us. Also, just so you know, the next in the series of webinars is Facing Mental Health Challenges During a Pandemic, which is slated for next Wednesday, September 30th. I think the way Ryan and I would end this is that, one, first, thank you so much for making the time. Two, it's clear there is a lot going on, really fast moving. There, as we said, are sort of like 12 media cycles every day, hard to keep up. But at the end of the day, there is an important presidential race. There are really important Senate races and House races. And I think people, a lot of people are motivated. And so Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump are trying to talk to the motivated folks. But I think they're also trying to get, as a big a landscape as possible to come out because it's going to be crazy. Ryan, any closing thoughts? Yeah, and next year, I think, depending on how this all plays out, either there will be a lot of action in D.C. if the House is Democrat, Senate and White House. We'll see a lot of bills. If the Republicans can keep one of those three, it'll be a little bit slower and a lot more defense in town from the parties. So it's been interesting and exciting several months, and happy that we were able to do this. So appreciate it. Appreciate it. And again, if we didn't get to your question, we will be in touch with you individually. Ryan, thank you so much for making the time. This is the first time I've seen him since March, so it's good to be 6 feet away from you. Thanks to everybody. Stay healthy, stay informed, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, great job, everyone. We're